Late at night in Ascent Capital's dim office, Zayn spots a suspicious anomaly in the market data. Cold coffee and chips sit untouched beside him. He discovers a single entity secretly buying currency derivatives through hundreds of shell companies. A massive, coordinated siege, not normal trading. His phone buzzes, startling him. He knocks over his coffee. The caller ID reads Mr. Hamdi. He answers nervously. Mr. Hamdi says their biggest client just pulled out everything. Zayn says he found something bigger. Hamdi says he's coming to the office. Zayn realizes Munir Al-Bashar is building a silent fortress to crash the national currency and buy the entire country for pennies. Zayn paces terrified. He's a 23-year-old analyst. Munir is a $40 billion titan. The odds seem suicidal. Mr. Hamdi arrives rain-soaked and sees the data. Zayn tells him Munir isn't just withdrawing, he plans to drown them all. Hamdi says they're too small to fight. Zayn counters defiantly, they have math and the support of ordinary people who hate Munir. An hour later, Zayn proposes creating an army of retail traders, thousands of them, using social media and algorithms to coordinate a counterattack. Hamdi scoffs at the idea of fighting with memes and small accounts. Zayn insists they can force Munir's margin to explode and make him bleed billions. Zayn opened his laptop and showed Mr. Hamdi a complex simulation. The screen showed a vibrant, chaotic battle of lines and arrows. This is a simulation. If we rally exactly 250,000 people to buy simultaneously at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, his hedge fund's algorithm will trigger a massive loss. He'll be forced to liquidate. Mr. Hamdi stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. It was now 2:15 a.m. Zayn sat alone in the break room staring at a stale donut. He pulled out his phone and opened a private chat group he'd secretly built for years, a community of math students and amateur traders he'd taught online. They were his only hope. His fingers trembled as he typed, "I need your help. The economy is about to be destroyed. I have a plan." Within minutes, the group exploded with responses. Skepticism, excitement, fear, and curiosity flooded the chat. Zayn's heart raced as he read the messages. One user, Layla the Trader, typed, "This is insane, but if your math is right, I'm in." Zayn smiled nervously. He had his first soldier. Sunlight crept through the blinds of the office. Zayn hadn't slept. He was still in the same wrinkled shirt, his hair a chaotic mess. He stared at his phone as the number of committed traders grew: 78, 120, 315, 700. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with nausea. This was a bank run in reverse, a digital uprising, but he was terrified of what would happen if it failed. Munir Al-Bashar sat in a penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, a glass of water in his hand. He was a man in his 50s with a sharp suit and cold, calculating eyes. His assistant stood nearby reading a report. "Sir, there's unusual chatter online. A group of small-time traders seems to be mobilizing." Munir laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Let them dream. The market doesn't care about dreams." Zayn's phone rang. It was Layla. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice shaking. "Hello?" A confident female voice responded. "Zayn, it's Layla. I've mobilized my network. We have almost 2,000 traders confirmed, but we need a name, a symbol." Zayn's eyes glowed with a strange calm. "Call it the Sandstorm." Zayn sat in a crowded internet cafe surrounded by strangers. He was sweating, his hands clamming up as he prepared to go live on a public broadcast. He hated crowds. He hated being seen, but he forced himself to speak. "Hello, everyone. My name is Zayn, and I'm going to show you how to break a billionaire." Thousands of people watched the live stream. Comments flooded the screen. Some called him a genius. Others called him a fraud. Zayn's voice cracked as he explained the scheme, but his math was undeniable. He clicked a button showing a visual of a massive wave crashing against a fortified wall. "We are the wave. The wall is Munir's greed, and waves always win." The next morning at exactly 9:28 a.m., Zayn stood in front of his monitors with Mr. Hamdi beside him. The tension was suffocating. Sweat trickled down Zayn's neck. He opened his chat group. The countdown began, 10:98. His finger hovered over the execute button for the buy orders. At 9:30 a.m., Zayn pressed enter. Simultaneously, tens of thousands of small orders flooded the market. The system hiccuped. The trading chart went wild, spiking upward with violent energy. On the screens across the country, the national currency's value jumped, then jumped again. Zayn watched with wide eyes, his breath held. Inside Munir Al-Bashar's office, alarms blared. His assistant rushed in, pale-faced. "Sir, we're losing billions. A coordinated attack is forcing our margin positions to liquidate automatically." Munir stood up abruptly, his glass shattering on the floor. "Who is doing this?" The assistant showed him Zayn's face on a news website, the livestream replay. "A nobody, an analyst. His followers call him the Sandstorm." Zayn's heart pounded as he watched the ticker. The enemy's positions were crumbling. He opened the chat group again. It was chaos, but the good kind, messages of joy and disbelief. "We did it. We actually did it." Zayn's hands were shaking so hard he couldn't type a reply. He slumped in his chair, overwhelmed. Munir picked up his personal phone, his face a mask of controlled fury. He dialed a number directly to the Minister of Finance. "I need emergency intervention. The market is being manipulated by terrorists." The minister paused. "By small traders, Munir. By small traders who believe you're corrupt. We're watching." Zayn stepped outside the office for the first time in 24 hours. The sun was blinding. He covered his eyes with his hand and leaned against the wall. A group of young people across the street held up phones, cheering. One of them shouted, "Sandstorm?" Zayn froze, his social anxiety spiking. He quickly ducked back inside. Inside, Layla was waiting for him. She was a sharp-faced woman in her mid-20s with a determined expression. She crossed her arms and smiled. "You did it. You saved the economy." Zayn avoided eye contact. "No, I just delayed it. He'll find another way." Layla stepped closer. "Then we'll find another way. You're not alone anymore." Zayn looked at his reflection in the dark monitor. He was a mess, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, messy hair. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his eyes held a new fire. He turned to Layla. "If he wants a war, I'll give him a war, but we need a strategy, a real one." They gathered in Mr. Hamdi's office. Zayn, Layla, Mr. Hamdi, and Amir, a tech-savvy friend from the chat group. Amir set up a holographic projection of the market data. He was a stocky young man with a confident grin. "The data is clear. Munir is hiding his money in offshore accounts, but I can trace them." Layla placed a legal document on the table. "And I have contacts in the financial prosecutor's office." Zayn stared at the complex web of connections. "We don't just attack him financially, we expose him, we show the public exactly what he was trying to do." He grabbed a marker and drew a line from Munir's face to a stack of money. "We bury him with the truth, let the people decide who the villain is." A few days later, Zayn uploaded a second video. This time he was calm, he wore a clean shirt and had styled his hair. He spoke directly to the camera. "Munir Al-Bashar tried to destroy our country's economy. He planned to buy our suffering, but he failed. And now we're coming for him legally. Join us." Munir watched the video from his office, his face twitching with rage. He slammed his fist on the desk. "Find me that boy's weakness. Everyone has a weakness." His assistant nodded nervously. "He has social anxiety, sir. He's terrified of crowds." Munir's eyes narrowed. "Then we give him a crowd and we make him talk." Zayn, Layla, and Amir walked to a press conference in a large auditorium. Zayn felt his chest constrict as he saw the massive gathering of reporters and cameras. His palms were drenched. He stopped at the entrance, his eyes wide. Layla grabbed his arm. "Breathe, you can do this." Zayn shook his head, frozen. Layla stepped forward and faced the crowd first. "Welcome, everyone. I am Layla, a legal advisor to the Sandstorm movement. We are here to present our formal complaint against Munir Al-Bashar for economic sabotage." Zayn slowly followed her, hiding behind the podium, his face pale. His legs felt like jelly. He gripped the sides of the podium. The lights were blinding. Hundreds of faces stared at him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The reporters leaned forward. Zayn closed his eyes and forced himself to remember the numbers, the math, the truth. He opened his eyes again, his voice soft. He tried to kill the economy. A reporter shouted, "What evidence do you have?" Zayn nodded at Amir, who connected a laptop to the main screen. "We have 30 terabytes of data showing the shell corporations. Every single one traces back to his holdings." The screen displayed a complex but undeniable flowchart leading directly to Munir's face. The room erupted. That night, Zayn sat on his apartment balcony, a cold breeze brushing his face. Layla sat beside him, quiet. "You were good out there," she said. Zayn laughed nervously. "I almost passed out." Layla smiled. "But you didn't. You're stronger than you think, Zayn." Zayn looked at his trembling hands. "I don't feel strong, I feel lucky." 2 weeks later, the financial prosecutor arrested Munir Al-Bashar at his private airport. News cameras captured the moment he was handcuffed and led into a vehicle. He looked old, defeated, smaller than his photographs. The national currency stabilized. The economy breathed a collective sigh of relief. Zayn returned to the small office of Ascent Capital. Mr. Hamdi stood by the window, looking out at the city. "The board wants you to be a partner now. You can have anything you want." Zayn sat down at his old desk, covered in equations. "I just want to fix the algorithms, make them fair, so this can never happen again." Layla entered the office holding a stack of documents. "We've established a new platform, the Sandstorm Exchange, a place for small traders to work together transparently." Zayn looked up, a genuine smile forming for the first time. "How many members?" Layla grinned. "Over 1 million, you're a celebrity now, Zayn." Zayn stood on a quiet street corner alone, wearing an old hoodie and worn-out jeans, trying to avoid the occasional glance from strangers. He ordered a coffee at a small kiosk, his voice soft. A young boy nearby pointed at him. "Mom, look, it's the Sandstorm guy." Zayn blushed deeply, paid quickly, and hurried away. Back in the office, Amir was laughing hysterically at a meme on his phone. "Zayn, they made a cartoon of you defeating Munir like a video game boss." He showed the phone. The cartoon, Zayn wore a cape and wielded a giant calculator. Zayn groaned, hiding his red face in his hands. "I hate this." That evening, Layla found Zayn in the break room staring at the same old donuts. "What are you thinking about?" Zayn looked up, his expression serious. "I'm thinking about what's next. Munir was just one man, the system is still broken." Layla sat beside him. "Then we fix it together, one step at a time." Zayn turned to her, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm terrified of people, Layla, but maybe I can learn to trust a few." Layla placed a hand on his arm. "That's a good start." Zayn looked at her hand and smiled nervously. "Okay, one step at a time." The final scene was a wide shot of the city skyline at sunset. The lights of thousands of buildings began to flicker on as the sky turned a brilliant orange and purple. And somewhere inside a small, chaotic office, Zayn stared at his screens, surrounded by friends ready to face the next challenge. His hands were still trembling, but his eyes were steady. Inside the small office the next morning, the team gathered around the central monitor. A news anchor on the screen spoke in a serious tone. Minister Khalid Al-Fad has announced new regulations that could effectively shut down independent trading platforms. Zayn stared at the screen, his face pale with disbelief. Layla crossed her arms tightly. Amir shook his head. A close-up of the television screen showed Minister Khalid Al-Fad. He was a man in his late 40s with slick-back gray hair, a broad jaw, and cold, calculating eyes. He wore an immaculate black suit with a red tie. He smirked at the press, adjusting his cufflinks. "These unregulated platforms threaten our national security," he said smugly. Zayn slammed his notepad onto the desk, scattering papers. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His hands were trembling with frustration. He was Munir's ally, he's just covering up the tracks. Mr. Hamdi placed a calming hand on his shoulder, his weary face showing deep concern. Amir's laptop suddenly emitted a loud, sharp beep. A red warning window flashed across the screen. Intrusion detected. Amir leaned in, his confident grin vanishing instantly. "Someone is trying to breach the Sandstorm exchange database," he said, his voice tight with panic. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Zayn rushed behind Amir's chair, leaning over his shoulder. His eyes darted across the complex lines of code on the screen. "They're using a brute force backdoor. Redirect the authentication protocols to the backup server," he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Amir typed rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. Layla stood in the corner of the room, holding her phone to her ear, her voice calm but firm. "No, I will not accept that. The Sandstorm exchange is fully compliant. If Minister Al-Fad wants a legal battle, he'll have to face the financial prosecutor directly." She hung up and turned to the others. "They're trying to intimidate us." The team decided to hold a press conference to respond. Zayn walked onto the small stage, his legs feeling like jelly. He waved awkwardly at the crowd, misjudged the step, and tripped over his own feet, stumbling forward and catching himself on the podium. A few reporters chuckled. Zayn's face turned bright red, but he forced a nervous grin. In a grand ministerial office, Khalid Al-Fad sat behind a massive oak desk. He held a landline phone to his ear. "I want that platform discredited. Find me any dirt on that boy Zayn. His family, his past, his mental health, anything." He hung up and stared coldly out the window at the city below. Back in the office, Zayn's personal phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. It was an anonymous text message. It read simply, "You have 48 hours to shut down, leave the country, or we will destroy everything you built." Zayn's hand shook as he showed the phone to the others. The air in the room grew heavy. That evening, Layla and Zayn sat at a small table in the break room, surrounded by scattered legal documents and laptops. Layla was highlighting important clauses in a law book. Zayn was scribbling complex financial formulas. The office was silent except for the hum of the vending machine and the occasional scratch of pens. They were utterly exhausted. Zayn reached for his cup of hot tea to take a sip. His hand was still trembling from the stress. He missed his mouth entirely, spilling the hot liquid down the front of his crisp white shirt. He yelped, jumping up and patting his chest frantically. Layla looked up, her eyes wide, then burst into uncontrollable laughter. The team gathered around the whiteboard. Zayn drew a line graph showing public sentiment. "We need a massive rally, a peaceful public demonstration of support for the Sandstorm exchange. We need to show Khalid that he can't bully 1,000,000 people." Amir nodded enthusiastically. Layla looked at Zayn with a flicker of admiration. Zayn stared at the calendar on his phone. The rally was in 3 days. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He clutched the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. The thought of speaking to thousands of people in an open field made his stomach churn violently. He felt like he was suffocating. Amir came up with a solution. "We'll use a holographic avatar of you. It'll speak your pre-written words. You can control it from a safe room." He set up a projector. The holographic Zayn appeared, but it glitched, its mouth moving out of sync with the audio, and it started dancing wildly. Zayn stared in horror. Amir burst out laughing. The avatar was a disaster. Zayn had to step out from the safe room and onto the real stage. He faced the roaring crowd of thousands, his legs trembling. He grabbed the microphone with both hands. His voice was a shaky whisper at first. Then he cleared his throat and shouted, "We will not be silenced." The crowd cheered wildly. Later that night, Zayn stared at his monitors alone. He had built a new predictive algorithm. A green line on the graph showed a sharp, unnatural dip scheduled for the next trading day. "He's going to artificially crash the currency to blame us," Zayn muttered to himself, his eyes wide with realization. He immediately called the team. Zayn, Layla, and Mr. Hamdi walked into a cold, sterile boardroom. Minister Khalid Al-Fad sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by his aides. The tension was suffocating. Khalid smiled condescendingly. "You're out of your depth, boy. Go back to your little chat rooms." Zayn clenched his fists under the table. Zayn placed a tablet on the table, showing the predictive graph. "I know your plan, Minister. You're going to crash the national currency tomorrow at 10:15 a.m. We have the counter strategy ready. You will lose everything you've invested in the shadows." Khalid's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The next morning at exactly 10:15 a.m., Zayn gave the order via the chat group. Execute Operation Phoenix. Thousands of small trades flooded the system, stabilizing the currency against the artificial dip. The graph bounced back instantly. Zayn exhaled, his entire body slumping with relief. A hilarious video surfaced online. An elderly woman named Fatima with a kind face and a flower print dress recorded herself investing her pension into the Sandstorm exchange. She waved at the camera. "I believe in the young man with the glasses. Let's beat the old foxes." Zayn watched the video, hiding his face in embarrassment. Zayn's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered hesitantly. A deep voice spoke. "Mr. Zayn, Minister Al-Fad wants to meet you, alone, at the Al-Noor Tower, Suite 450, come now." Before Zayn could respond, the line went dead. His heart raced as he grabbed his jacket. Zayn stood in front of the towering Al-Noor skyscraper, looking up. The glass building reflected the harsh afternoon sun. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans and walked through the revolving doors. The marble lobby was vast and intimidating. He felt like a tiny ant entering a giant's palace. Inside the suite, Khalid sat in a leather armchair swirling a glass of water. He gestured for Zayn to sit. On the low table between them lay a white envelope thick with cash. "Take this, disband your movement, go to Europe, live comfortably." Khalid's voice was silky smooth, dripping with false generosity. Zayn stared at the envelope. His mouth was dry. He looked at the money, then at the minister. His hands were shaking, but his voice was surprisingly steady. "No, you can buy corrupt politicians, but you can't buy the truth. I'll take this envelope and give it to the prosecutor as evidence." He reached for it. Khalid's face twisted in fury. He slammed his hand down on the table, stopping Zayn's hand. "Listen to me, you little rat. I know about your father's debts. I know about your sister's illness. I will destroy your family, not just your career." His cold eyes bore into Zayn's soul. Zayn snatched his hand back and stood up abruptly. His face was pale, drained of all color. He backed toward the door, his chest heaving. Without another word, he fled the suite, his footsteps echoing loudly in the silent corridor. He didn't stop running until he reached the elevator. Zayn burst back into the small office. Layla was waiting. She saw his terrified, shaking face and immediately rushed to him. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him in a firm, protective hug. Zayn froze, stiff as a board, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air. Zayn's brain went completely blank. He was hyper-aware of the warmth of Layla's embrace, the soft fabric of her blazer. His face turned crimson and he started stammering incoherently. He threatened. He finally relaxed and awkwardly patted her back. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode. Amir burst in, breaking the awkward moment. "I found it in the encrypted files from Munir's servers." He held up his laptop, his curly hair bouncing with excitement. A document labeled Khalid Al-Fad Offshore PDF was highlighted on the screen. Zayn and Layla immediately rushed over, their faces shifting from shock to determination. The document was heavily encrypted. Lines of gibberish and random characters filled the screen. Amir's confident grin faded. "This is military-grade encryption. It would take a supercomputer months to crack." Zayn sat down, cracked his knuckles, and stared at the code. "I don't have months, I have hours." Zayn sat alone in the dark office at 3:00 a.m. The only light was the glow of the monitor. His head was nodding forward, his eyes heavy. He fell forward, his face smashing gently onto the keyboard, the screen filled with random letters. He was fast asleep, snoring softly, his glasses askew. Layla walked in with fresh coffee at sunrise. She saw Zayn asleep on the keyboard, drooling slightly. The keys had left a distinct pattern of red marks imprinted on his cheek. She smiled softly and gently tapped his shoulder. "Zayn, wake up, I brought coffee." He jolted upright, confused, a W key stuck to his forehead. Zayn rubbed his sore face and looked at the screen. His sleep-deprived brain suddenly saw a pattern in the gibberish. "Wait, it's a polyalphabetic cipher. He's using a personalized key based on the national anthem." His fingers flew across the keyboard. The document decrypted itself, revealing a massive list of illegal transactions totaling billions. The team gathered around the screen, stunned by the numbers. Layla broke the silence. "We can't leak this to the press directly. It's too big. It will be buried." Mr. Hamdi stroked his chin. "We give it to Munir Al-Bashar. She's the only investigative journalist who's never taken a bribe." Munir Al-Bashar, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, visited the office. Zayn heard her voice and immediately ducked under his desk, hiding behind the cable clutter. Amir stared at Zayn under the desk and shrugged at Amira. He's looking for a dropped pen." Layla rolled her eyes. The next morning, the front page of the national newspaper featured Amira's exposé. The headline read, "Minister Al-Fad's billion-dollar shadow network exposed." Below it was a photograph of Khalid's smirking face, digitally crossed out in red. Zayn held the newspaper, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and triumph. Outside the Ministry of Finance, a massive crowd gathered. They held signs reading "Sandstorm, Justice, and Resign Now." They chanted Zayn's name. The sound of thousands of voices echoed through the downtown streets. Inside his car, Zayn watched from a distance, his eyes wide with awe and anxiety. Television screens inside the office showed Khalid's political allies holding urgent press conferences, distancing themselves from him. One by one, they resigned from their committees. The official government statement read, We are investigating Minister Al-Fad with the utmost urgency. The dominoes were falling. Khalid held a desperate press conference in his ministerial hall. He looked haggard, his slicked hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He pointed at the camera. This is a conspiracy, a foreign plot to destabilize us. His voice cracked as he shouted, sweat glistening on his forehead. Zayn sat in his office watching the press conference live. He opened his laptop and started live tweeting. With every lie Khalid spoke, Zayn posted the corresponding mathematical proof and data counter. His fingers flew. 1:42 p.m. he lies, proof attached. 1:45 p.m. he lies again, attached. The internet exploded. Khalid's press conference spiraled into chaos. Reporters started shouting his own data back at him, reading from Zayn's viral tweets. Khalid stammered, his face contorting in rage and confusion. He pointed at the journalists. You are all traitors. He stormed off the stage, tripping over a cable. The cameras captured everything. Later that afternoon, an official convoy of black vehicles arrived at the Ministry of Finance. Officers in formal suits walked into Khalid's office carrying a search warrant. Khalid sat behind his desk, his head in his hands, defeated. One of the officers placed a hand on his shoulder and read him his rights. Back in the small office, the team ordered several large pizzas. The boxes were stacked on the desk. Amir grabbed a huge slice and bit into it, cheese stretching everywhere. Zayn laughed, but as he bit into his slice, a glob of tomato sauce splattered onto his round glasses. Layla and Amir burst out laughing, pointing. Zayn stood in the quiet break room, looking at an old photograph on his phone. It was a picture of him from 2 years ago, wearing oversized headphones, hiding behind a library bookshelf, looking terrified of the world. He looked so different now. He touched the screen gently, a soft, melancholic smile on his face. Zayn sat at his desk and wrote on a piece of paper, Dear younger me, you will face your worst fears. You will sweat, shake, and almost pass out. But you will also find a family, and you will learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. He folded the paper and placed it in his drawer. Layla walked up to Zayn's desk, her usual confident demeanor slightly nervous. She fidgeted with her blazer's sleeve. Zayn, the crisis is over. I was thinking, maybe we could get coffee, just us, without the team. Zayn's eyes went wide. He nodded frantically, unable to form a coherent word. Zayn sat across from Layla at a small, cozy cafe. The warm smell of roasted beans filled the air. He clutched his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles were white. He took a deep breath, his face pale. Layla smiled kindly. Relax, Zayn, it's just coffee. He exhaled slowly and managed a tiny, genuine smile. As they left the cafe, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the street. Zayn awkwardly reached out his hand toward Layla's. She noticed and smiled, grabbing his hand firmly. Zayn's face turned bright red, but he didn't pull away. He held her hand, his trembling finally stopping for the first time in weeks. In a grand hall, an official ceremony was held. Zayn stood on the stage in a new dark blue blazer, holding a plaque. It read, The Sandstorm Financial Transparency Act. The president of the country shook his hand and whispered, Thank you for saving our economy. Zayn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Zayn and Layla stood on the balcony of the Ascent Capital office, looking at the city skyline as the sun set. The horizon was painted in vibrant hues of gold, pink, and purple. Zayn leaned on the railing, his hands still slightly trembling, but his eyes were calm and steady. Layla stood beside him, their shoulders touching. The war was over, but he knew the work had just begun. Zayn stood alone in his small apartment, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. His hair was a disaster, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were still trembling. He splashed cold water on his face and took a deep breath. His phone buzzed with 100 notifications. He turned it face down on the sink. Zayn walked into the cramped living room where his younger sister, Amal, sat on an old sofa wrapped in a blanket. She was 17, pale-skinned with dark circles under her eyes, holding a hot cup of tea. She smiled weakly. Big brother, I saw you on TV. You looked like you were going to faint. Zayn sat beside her and rubbed his tired eyes. Their father, a weary man in his 50s named Samir, entered the room holding a stack of overdue bills. He wore a worn-out brown cardigan. He sighed heavily. Zayn, the hospital called. Amal's treatment is expensive. I don't know how much longer we can manage. Zayn's jaw tightened. Don't worry, Baba, I'll handle it. Zayn sat on his bed that night staring at his laptop. The chat group was exploding with messages of praise. He scrolled through them, but his anxiety only grew. He saw a comment. He's our hero. He closed the laptop immediately, his breathing becoming rapid. He hugged his knees to his chest, rocking slightly. The next morning, Layla arrived at Zayn's apartment with a bag of groceries. She knocked on the door. Zayn opened it, looking exhausted in a wrinkled hoodie. Layla raised an eyebrow. Did you sleep at all? Zayn shook his head silently. She pushed past him. I'm making you breakfast. Layla stood in Zayn's tiny kitchen, cracking eggs into a frying pan. Amal watched from the sofa, smiling. You're the lady from the news, right? Layla nodded. I'm Layla, your brother's partner in chaos. Amal giggled. Zayn sat at the small dining table, watching them, a faint, hesitant smile forming on his lips. Zayn's phone rang. It was Amir. Zayn, you need to see this. A new hedge fund called Crimson Capital is shorting our currency. It's massive. They're using a decentralized AI algorithm. Zayn's face went pale. He dropped his fork onto the plate. Layla turned, concern etched on her face. Zayn rushed to the office, leaving Layla and Amal behind. He burst through the door. Amir was already at his desk, the monitors displaying a red, aggressive graph. "This is worse than Munir. This isn't one man. It's a faceless machine programmed to bleed us dry," Amir said, his voice grim. Zayn stared at the numbers. Zayn sat down and began analyzing the algorithm's pattern. He realized it was designed to trigger human panic. It exploited fear. It's psychological. It knows exactly when to dump and when to spike to scare traders into selling. He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. Layla entered the office out of breath. She had clearly run from Zayn's apartment. "I called my legal contacts. Crimson Capital is registered in a tax haven, but its funding traces back to 3 major banks connected to Munir's old network." She placed a file on the desk. "They want revenge." Layla sat beside Zayn in his apartment, trying to calm him down. "You faced worse, you faced Munir, you faced Khalid. This is just a debate." Zayn shook his head frantically. "On live television, Layla, millions of people watching. What if I freeze?" Layla grabbed his hands firmly. "Then I'll be in the front row, and I'll hold up a sign that says breathe." Zayn arrived at the television studio. The lights were blinding and the cameras loomed like mechanical monsters. Victor sat across from him, smirking confidently. Zayn's heart hammered against his ribs. The host began the introduction. Zayn clutched the armrest of his chair, his knuckles white. Victor spoke first, his voice calm and condescending. "Mr. Zayn, your little movement is based on emotion. Markets don't care about emotion, they care about data." Zayn opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. He looked down, his face burning with shame. The studio fell silent. He saw Layla in the front row, holding a small paper sign that read, "Breathe." Zayn inhaled deeply. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. His voice came out steady. "Victor, data without ethics is just a weapon. Your algorithm is designed to steal the savings of millions of families. I have the counter-algorithm here. It's mathematically impossible for you to win." Victor's smirk faded slightly. Zayn held up a tablet showing a live simulation. The graph on the screen showed his algorithm perfectly neutralizing Victor's attacks. "You're not fighting me, you're fighting math and justice." The studio audience erupted in applause. Victor adjusted his tie, clearly rattled. Zayn leaned back, his hands still trembling but a triumphant smile on his face. Back at the office, Amir replayed the debate footage. "Did you see his face? Victor looked like he swallowed a lemon." Zayn laughed, but then he froze as he saw his own nervous fidgeting on screen. He buried his face in his hands. "I look so awkward," Layla smiled. "You look human, that's what people love." Zayn walked home through the evening streets, feeling a strange sense of peace. He noticed a group of teenagers wearing hoodies with Sandstorm printed on them. They spotted him and waved excitedly. Zayn waved back shyly, his face turning red. He quickly ducked into a convenience store to escape the attention. Inside the convenience store, Zayn grabbed a bag of chips and a bottle of water. The cashier, an elderly man, recognized him. "Aren't you that young man who saved our economy?" Zayn nodded nervously. The cashier smiled warmly. "My grandson invested his small savings because of you. He's so proud." Zayn didn't know what to say. He just smiled and paid quickly. Zayn received a phone call from his father, Samir. Samir's voice was strained. "Zayn, debt collectors came to the house. They said your father owes a loan that was transferred to an international holding company. They're threatening to take the house." Zayn felt his blood run cold. "Baba, I'll fix it, I promise." Zayn traced the debt collectors company. They were a shell subsidiary of Crimson Capital's network. It was harassment, a deliberate attack on his family to break his spirit. Zayn's face was a mask of cold fury. He had never felt such pure personal anger. He called Layla. "They're going after my family." Layla arrived at Zayn's apartment with a thick folder of legal documents. "I've already filed a harassment claim. The courts are on our side now. This is going to blow up in their faces." Zayn hugged her tightly, burying his face in her shoulder. "Thank you, I don't know what I'd do without you." Layla hugged him back fiercely. Zayn's sister Amal sat in her hospital bed, hooked up to a monitor. Zayn sat beside her, holding her pale, thin hand. "I'm sorry I've been so busy, Amal." Amal squeezed his hand weakly. "Stop apologizing, you're fighting for everyone, that includes me." Zayn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Zayn spent the night in the hospital, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair next to Amal's bed. He had dark circles under his eyes and his clothes were rumpled. He woke up to a small note on his chest from Amal. It read, "You're my hero, now go kick their butts." Zayn smiled softly and folded the note carefully into his pocket. The counter-algorithm went live on the Sandstorm exchange. Within minutes, it was attacked by Crimson Capital's AI. Zayn watched the battle on his monitors. It was a silent digital war of lines and numbers. His algorithm held steady, absorbing the blows. Amir cheered. "It's working, it's like a digital fortress." Zayn knew they couldn't just defend forever. He activated a hidden feature, a digital counterattack that mirrored the algorithm's own strategy back at it. The attack bounced off his fortress and struck Crimson Capital's own system. The enemy graph went haywire, spiking wildly. Zayn leaned forward, his eyes wide. "We hit them back." Victor called Zayn personally. His voice was livid. "You can't do this. This is market manipulation." Zayn's voice was calm and cold. "No, Victor, this is justice. You wanted to scare us. We decided to fight back with math, and math never loses." He hung up. His hand was shaking, but his heart was steady. Crimson Capital's positions began to crumble. News channels reported on the mysterious digital defeat. The national currency surged to a new high. Zayn watched the ticker, his breath held, then released it slowly. He turned to his team. Layla was grinning, Amir was doing a victory dance. Mr. Hamdi simply nodded, his eyes shining with pride. Zayn walked to Amal's hospital room, his steps light. He pushed open the door. Amal was sitting up, watching the news on a small television. She turned to him, her eyes wide. "Brother, you did it again?" Zayn walked to her bed and kissed her forehead. "We did it together." He handed her a small envelope. "This is for your treatment, it's all paid." Amal opened the envelope. Inside was a check, her eyes filled with tears. She hugged Zayn fiercely. "You saved me," Zayn's voice cracked. "I saved myself too, Amal. I finally stopped being afraid." The hospital room was quiet and peaceful, sunlight streaming through the window. Zayn stood on the hospital balcony looking at the city below. Layla joined him holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look exhausted," Zayn chuckled. "I feel like I haven't slept in a year." He took a sip of the coffee. "But I feel lighter." Layla leaned on the railing beside him. "That's growth." Zayn received a formal invitation to speak at the United Nations Economic Forum. He stared at the letter, his mouth agape. Amir grabbed it from his hands. "No way, UN," Amir laughed. "Zayn, you're going international." Zayn felt his anxiety spike, but he also felt something else, excitement. He smiled nervously. The office celebrated with cake. Layla bought a large chocolate cake with Sandstorm written in white icing. Zayn tried to cut it, but his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the knife. Amir caught the knife midair and winked. "Allow me, Mr. International." Everyone laughed, including Zayn. Layla suddenly grabbed Zayn's arm and shoved his face into the cake playfully. He came up with chocolate frosting all over his glasses and cheeks. The room went silent, then erupted in laughter. Zayn stood there frozen, then slowly licked the frosting off his lips. "This is surprisingly good." He then grabbed a handful of frosting and smeared it on Amir's face. A food fight erupted in the small office. Frosting flew everywhere, hitting the walls, the monitors, and Mr. Hamdi's tie. Mr. Hamdi stood still, his face covered in frosting, his expression perfectly neutral. Then slowly a smile cracked his weary face. "You're all cleaning this up." But he was laughing. Zayn stood on the roof of the office building alone, looking at the stars. The city lights twinkled below him. He pulled out the folded note from Amal and read it again. "You're my hero," he whispered to himself. "I never thought I could be anyone's hero." His hands were steady. The trembling had almost stopped entirely. The next day, Zayn went to a quiet park. He sat on a bench feeding crumbs to pigeons. An old man sat beside him and struck up a conversation. "You look familiar. Are you a celebrity?" Zayn shook his head. "No, just a guy who likes math," the old man laughed. "Math saved my pension, you know." Zayn smiled genuinely. Zayn met with Mr. Hamdi for tea. Mr. Hamdi poured the tea with steady hands. "Zayn, you've grown. When I first met you, you couldn't look me in the eye." Zayn looked him directly in the eyes. "I still have bad days, but I'm learning." Mr. Hamdi nodded. "That's all any of us can do." Zayn finally gave Layla a proper date. They went to a quiet art gallery. Zayn pointed at a painting of a stormy sea. "That's how I feel inside sometimes." Layla pointed at a painting of a calm lake. "That's how I see you now." Zayn blushed deeply. "That's poetic," Layla smiled. "I have my moments." As they left the gallery, a light rain began to fall. Zayn didn't run for cover. He stood there, letting the raindrops hit his face, laughing softly. "I used to hate the rain. It made everything feel cold." Layla stood beside him, getting wet too. "And now," Zayn turned to her, "now it feels clean." A young boy approached Zayn in the rain, holding a notebook. "Mr. Sandstorm, can I have your autograph?" Zayn's eyes widened. He looked at Layla, who nodded encouragingly. He took the notebook and wrote, "Believe in math, but more importantly, believe in yourself." The boy's face lit up. Zayn returned to Amal's hospital room for her discharge. Amal was dressed in a bright yellow sweater, her skin looking healthier. She twirled around. "The doctors say I'm getting better. Your money and support made all the difference." Zayn picked her up and spun her around, laughing. His sister was alive and she was healing. The family sat down for a dinner together for the first time in years. Zayn's father, Samir, cooked a simple meal. The table was small and worn. Amal was laughing at a joke. Zayn looked around the table, his eyes glistening. He felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude. He wasn't alone anymore. Zayn received an anonymous letter. Inside was a single piece of paper. It read, "You destroyed my empire, but you also showed me something I lost long ago, integrity. I'm sorry." Zayn stared at the signature. M could only be Munir Al-Bashar. He folded the letter and placed it in his drawer next to the note from Amal. Zayn stood on the balcony of the Ascent Capital office with Layla once more. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Zayn didn't look at the sky, he looked at Layla. "I want to do this forever, not the fighting, but this with you." Layla leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'd like that." The final scene showed Zayn sitting in the middle of the office, surrounded by Amir, Layla, and Mr. Hamdi. The monitors were calm and steady. Zayn cracked his knuckles, a playful smile on his face. "So, what's next?" Amir laughed. "Let's build something bigger." Zayn leaned back in his chair, his hands finally still. "All right, let's build the future." Zayn sat in his small bedroom, staring at the open, empty suitcase on the bed. The United Nations trip was only days away, and a wave of anxiety washed over his chest. He looked at his passport, which he had never used before, and his hand trembled as he picked it up. Amal skipped into the room wearing a bright yellow sweater, looking much healthier. She grabbed a white shirt from Zayn's closet and tossed it into the suitcase. "You'll look great, brother. Just smile and don't fall off the stage this time." Zayn laughed bitterly. "Thanks for the confidence." At the airport, Zayn stood in front of the boarding gate, his hands sweating profusely. The crowd was large and noisy. He suddenly felt dizzy and stepped back, bumping into a luggage cart. His suitcase fell and burst open, scattering his clothes in front of the travelers. His face turned red with embarrassment as he quickly gathered his belongings. Zayn sat in the narrow airplane seat, looking out the window at the white clouds. His heart was pounding. His seatmate, a kind elderly woman, smiled at him. "First time flying?" Zayn shook his head shyly. "First time leaving the country." She offered him a piece of candy. "You'll be fine, young man." Zayn arrived in New York City. He stood in front of the towering skyscrapers, tilting his head back so far his cap almost fell off. The crowds were overwhelming and cars honked madly. He felt completely lost. He pulled out his phone to call Amir but realized his SIM card wasn't working. He froze in place. Zayn entered the magnificent United Nations building. The halls were vast and filled with official delegations, men and women in elegant suits. Zayn felt like an ant in a palace. Some delegates stared at him in confusion. He wore his poorly ironed blue blazer and stood in a corner, trying not to draw attention. A young woman from South Africa approached him with dark skin and a warm smile, introducing herself as Naomi. She said in a calm voice, "You're the Sandstorm guy, I've heard about you. In my country, we're facing the same conspiracy. Can you help us?" Zayn looked into her hopeful eyes and felt the weight of responsibility. Zayn sat with Naomi and delegates from 5 other countries in a small meeting room. They displayed complex financial data on a large screen. Zayn discovered a horrifying pattern. A global banking alliance, which they called the Knot, was planning to attack the currencies of developing nations all at once. Zayn stepped out of the room and called Layla via video. His face was pale and panicked. "Layla, this is bigger than we imagined. There's a global network. I can't do this alone." Layla looked at him firmly through the screen. "You're not alone. I'll come be with you. Wait for me." 2 days later, Zayn stood at New York's airport again, but this time he was waiting for Layla. He saw her emerge from the arrival's gate, her hair slightly messy, a small suitcase in her hand. He ran toward her without thinking and hugged her tightly in front of the crowd. He sighed with relief for the first time in days. The next day, Zayn stepped onto the UN podium. There were hundreds of delegates and cameras. He felt his legs trembling. He remembered the word breathe that Layla had written. He took a deep breath and looked at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we face an enemy that has no nationality, but it has numbers, and we will defeat it with numbers." After the speech, a tall man in a luxurious gray suit approached him with slick-back blonde hair and a cold smile. He said in a low voice, "I am Mr. Sterling, representative of the International Banking Alliance. You're playing with fire, boy." Zayn looked him directly in the eye despite his trembling hands. "Fire lights up the darkness, sir." Zayn returned to the hotel room with Layla completely exhausted. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. "He threatened me." Layla sat beside him and placed her hand on his back. "They've threatened you before, and every time you win because truth is on your side." Zayn raised his head, his tired eyes determined. In the middle of the night, Zayn received a video call from Amir. Amir was sitting in his bedroom at home, surrounded by portable monitors. He smiled. "I've hacked part of the Knot's network. They have a weakness. They rely on one central server in Switzerland. If we hit it, the entire network collapses." The next day, Zayn received a video message from Amal. She appeared wearing large sunglasses and laughing. "Brother, I watched your speech. You were great, even if you were shaking like an earthquake. Don't worry, I prayed for you." Zayn laughed heartily, feeling warmth in his heart. Zayn met with his new international team, Naomi from Africa, Raj from India, and Carlos from Brazil. They were all young like him, experts in math and technology. Zayn said as they planned, "We strike the central server in Switzerland tomorrow at 3 a.m. GMT. Get ready." At 2 a.m., Zayn sat in front of a laptop in the hotel room with Layla beside him. He was drenched in sweat. On the screen, the attack icon awaited the click. He looked at Layla. "What if we fail?" Layla squeezed his hand. "We'll try again, but we won't fail." Zayn pressed the attack button. Immediately, digital commands were sent around the world. On the screen, the Swiss server's numbers began to crash. Cheers came from the remote team. The Knot's network collapsed like a house of cards. Zayn fell back onto the bed, exhausted but victorious. In the morning, the news spread worldwide. The International Banking Alliance's stocks plummeted, and developing nations' currencies recovered at record speed. Zayn was on the cover of all international newspapers. He stood in front of a newsstand in New York, staring at his picture, unable to believe what he saw. Zayn and Layla walked through Central Park in New York. The weather was warm and sunny. They sat on the grass, each eating ice cream. Layla ate quickly, getting ice cream on her nose. Zayn pointed at her nose, laughing. "You look like a kid." She wiped her nose with a shy laugh. Zayn stood with Layla near the Statue of Liberty, the wind playing with his hair. He looked at the distant horizon and said, I started as a scared young man in a small office and now I'm here. I can't believe it. Layla hugged him from behind, because you never forgot who you were and who you were fighting for. Zayn returned to his country on a private jet offered by the government in appreciation. He sat in the plush seat but felt uncomfortable. He looked at Layla. This is strange. I'm used to narrow seats and worry, Layla laughed. You'll get used to the good things too, Zayn. Upon arrival at the airport, a large crowd was waiting to welcome him. People held signs reading Sandstorm. Zayn trembled at the sight of so many people. He held Layla's hand tightly. Amal, his father Samir, and the whole team approached him. He hugged them one by one, tears streaming down his face. The entire family went to a local restaurant for lunch. The place was crowded, but Zayn didn't run away this time. He sat with his father, mother, and Amal, eating a traditional meal. His father, Samir, spoke with a trembling voice, You've made me proud, son, not because of the money, but because you stayed honest. At the office, Amir hung a large frame containing all the newspaper covers featuring Zayn. Zayn stood in front of the frame, staring, then turned to Amir. This is excessive. Amir shook his head. No, my friend, this is history, and you made it. Layla sat with Zayn on the old office couch. She looked at him with serious eyes. I received an amazing offer. An international organization wants me to lead their legal department in Geneva. Zayn froze, feeling a sudden emptiness in his chest. That's great. Geneva is very far away. Zayn looked at the floor, trying to hide his discomfort. I mean, congratulations, that's your dream. But his voice was strained. Layla gently held his chin and lifted his head to face her. I turned it down. Zayn's eyes widened. What? Why? Layla smiled. Because my new dream is to be by your side here, building the future together. Zayn jumped up from the couch, almost tripping over the table leg. You turned down Geneva for me? Layla stood up slowly and stepped closer. Yes, because you deserve to be happy and I want to be part of your happiness. Zayn hugged her tightly, his face blushing with joy. The following week, Zayn, Layla, and Amir launched a new platform called the Sandstorm Bridge. It was a global platform allowing small investors from any country to collaborate. Zayn stood in front of the camera to launch it, his hands trembling this time with excitement, not fear. Naomi appeared on the video screen from Africa. She said, We've officially joined the Sandstorm Bridge. Thank you, Zayn. Raj from India and Carlos from Brazil also appeared. They raised their hands in greeting. Zayn felt like the commander of a global army for financial justice. One day, Zayn walked into the office and found Layla and Amir hiding something behind their backs. Amir said with a wide grin, We have a surprise for you. They brought out a huge cake shaped like a stock exchange screen with a rising green arrow. Zayn laughed until tears came to his eyes. Zayn sat on the office desk eating a piece of cake, then paused suddenly. Do you remember the day the coffee spilled on my papers? Amir laughed. How could I forget? You were about to have a breakdown. Zayn shook his head, smiling. If that coffee hadn't spilled, I wouldn't have found the conspiracy. That was the beginning of everything. Zayn wrote a long letter to Munir Al-Bashar in prison, telling him about the new changes and that he had forgiven him. He placed the letter in the envelope and sent it. He didn't expect a reply, but he felt inner peace for the first time. The reply came a week later. Munir had written in his tired handwriting, Thank you, Zayn. You taught me that wealth without conscience is poverty. I wish you well. Zayn folded the letter and placed it in his drawer beside Amal's note and Munir's first letter. The government invited Zayn to the presidential palace for an official ceremony. Zayn stood before the president, wearing an elegant blue blazer, but he was still fidgeting nervously with his fingers. The president placed a medal on his chest. This is the National Order of Merit for saving our economy and our people. Zayn could only smile humbly. After the ceremony, Zayn walked out of the palace and found Layla waiting for him in the car. He took the medal off his chest and handed it to her. Keep this, you helped me earn it. Layla looked at the medal, then at him. I'll keep it forever, but I'd rather have you. Over the weekend, Zayn went with Layla and his family to the beach. The sea was crystal clear and the breeze was refreshing. Zayn sat on the sand, building a small sandcastle. Amal ran up and splashed him with water, soaking his clothes completely. He laughed out loud and chased her along the shore. After the chase, Zayn lay on the sand, tired, looking up at the sky. Layla sat beside him, casting her shadow over him. You look happy. Zayn turned his head toward her. I am happy, really. After all these years of fear, I finally feel like I'm in the right place. In the evening, they sat around a small campfire on the beach. Amir was telling a funny story about a coding error that accidentally displayed cat pictures on the stock exchange screens. Everyone laughed until they cried. Zayn looked at the faces around him, his family, his friends, his love. He felt overwhelming gratitude. The next day, Zayn returned to the office and was surprised to find a young student waiting for him at the door. The student wore glasses and seemed nervous and hesitant. He said in a low voice, Mr. Zayn, I love math like you, but I'm afraid of people. How did you overcome your fear? Zayn sat with the student in the break room and offered him a cup of tea. He looked at him with kind eyes. I haven't completely overcome my fear. My hands still tremble every day, but I've learned to move forward despite the fear. Take one small step, talk to one person every day. After the student left, Zayn turned to Layla. I was exactly like him 2 years ago. Layla placed a hand on his shoulder. And now you're an inspiration to him. That's real growth. Zayn decided to establish a free educational foundation to teach financial literacy to underprivileged youth. He named it the Academy of Hope after his sister. At the opening ceremony, Zayn stood before a classroom full of young faces and said, "Mathematics is not just numbers, it's a weapon. Use it wisely." In the back room of the academy, Zayn found a note from Layla placed on his desk. He opened it and read, "When you look at those students, remember that you were once one of them, but you chose to be more. I love you." He folded the note and placed it in his pocket, smiling. During the academy's first graduation ceremony, Zayn walked onto the stage to give the commencement speech. The students cheered enthusiastically. He looked at the audience and said, "Today you are graduates, but tomorrow you are leaders. Don't let fear stop you from achieving justice." His hands were trembling, but his voice was strong. After the ceremony, Amal stood beside her brother. She too had graduated as the top student of the academy. She wore a white graduation gown and a bright smile. "Brother, thank you for giving me a second chance at life." Zayn hugged her, crying, "You're the one who gave me a reason to fight." That evening, Zayn invited Layla to the rooftop of the office where it all began. The sunset was breathtaking and the city lights began to twinkle. Zayn stepped back, then suddenly dropped to one knee. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple silver ring. Zayn trembled as he looked at Layla. "Layla, you were with me in my worst moments. You stood by me when I was afraid of my own shadow. I love you more than numbers. Will you be my partner in life?" Layla covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face, and nodded yes, sobbing. Zayn jumped up from his knee and embraced Layla tightly, then lifted her and spun her around the rooftop, laughing. The city lights were behind them and the sky blended with the golden sunset. He placed the ring on her finger and gently kissed her hand. His hands were still trembling, but his heart was full of peace. Zayn sat 2 weeks later on the balcony of his new home, staring at the horizon. Layla was sleeping beside him, Amal was studying in her room, and his father was watching TV inside. Zayn looked at his hands, which had finally stopped trembling. He took a deep breath and smiled. The war was over, and real life was just beginning. Zayn sat in his new living room, looking at the engagement ring on Layla's finger while she cooked in the kitchen. He felt a sudden urge to write everything down in a journal. He grabbed an old notebook and his pen and wrote, "Today, I am not the same person who used to hide behind screens, but I still remember that fear." The next day, a letter arrived from the Ministry of Finance asking Zayn to attend an emergency meeting. Zayn stood in front of the mirror wearing his blue blazer, talking to himself. "You're not afraid, you're just excited." But his hands trembled slightly. He sighed and closed his eyes for a moment. Zayn entered the large meeting hall. There were ministers and senior bankers, their faces rigid and guarded. At the head of the table sat a fat man with white hair, Dr. Fawzi, head of the central bank. He looked at Zayn with disdain. "You're the boy who plays with the stock market." Zayn answered in a calm but steady voice, "I'm the boy who saved the national currency, sir." The faces in the room froze. Dr. Fawzi stood up and said, "We appreciate what you did, but the game is over. The market needs stability, not revolutionaries." Zayn looked him directly in the eye, though his hands trembled under the table. Zayn left the meeting in shock. Layla was waiting for him in the car. He got in and closed the door forcefully. "They want to restrict our platform. They say we're unlicensed." Layla placed her hand on his. "We have lawyers, we have the truth, and we have the people, don't worry." That evening, Zayn invited Amir to his home. They sat on the sofa, surrounded by screens. Amir said, "I've looked into Dr. Fawzi's records. He has secret offshore accounts linked to the banking alliance we brought down." Zayn raised an eyebrow. "So he's not neutral, he's part of the old game." Zayn gathered a new team of young analysts at his office. There were 5 young men and women, their eyes burning with enthusiasm. Zayn stood before them and said, "We don't fight people, we fight a corrupt system, and our weapon is transparency." Everyone applauded enthusiastically. One day, Zayn's father, Samir, entered the office with a small cake. He said in his tired voice, "Son, today is your birthday. I remembered you used to hide under the table on your previous birthdays. Look how far you've come." Zayn hugged his father, swallowing his tears. The team celebrated Zayn's birthday at the office. They put a paper hat on his head and forced him to wear it. He looked ridiculous and the hat was too small for his head. Everyone laughed, including Zayn, as he looked at his reflection in the monitor. Layla gave Zayn a gift, an old book on financial mathematics with a handwritten note on the cover, "To the genius who taught me that numbers can be beautiful." Zayn opened the book and found it signed by its famous author. His eyes widened in amazement. Naomi video called Zayn from Africa. She was smiling. "Zayn, we applied your model in my country and the local currency recovered. You're a legend here." Zayn felt shy but smiled. "We're one team, this is a victory for all of us." At a new press conference, Zayn stood on the podium, his hands trembling less than usual. He told the journalists, "Today we launched the Global Financial Transparency Initiative. Any country that wants to join is welcome. We will expose corruption wherever it is." Cameras flashed and journalists asked questions eagerly. After the conference, a young journalist approached him and asked a sharp question. "Some say you're building your own financial empire and that you're no different from those you fought." Zayn paused for a moment, then replied calmly, "The difference is that I hide nothing. All my numbers are public, all my moves are visible, that's the difference. Zayn returned home exhausted. He sat in the living room with Layla. She said, "You handle pressure better now." He shook his head. "I'm still afraid, but I've learned that fear shouldn't stop me." Layla hugged him. That's maturity. Early in the morning, Zayn woke to a knock at the door. He opened it to find a strange man in a white suit holding a large envelope. The man said formally, "On behalf of Mr. Sterling, I extend an invitation for a personal meeting in Switzerland. The date is a week from now." He left the envelope and walked away. Zayn opened the envelope to find a luxurious invitation card written on it, "Come alone, tell no one, it will be in your best interest." Zayn shuddered. He showed the card to Layla, who said firmly, "This is a trap, don't go." But Zayn's eyes were full of curiosity. 2 days later, Zayn made a decision. He told Layla, "I will go, but not alone. I'll take Amir with me and we'll plant hidden recording devices. If he wants a conspiracy, we'll expose him to the world." Layla looked at him with pride and fear. "You've become very brave, Zayn." Zayn and Amir traveled to Switzerland. The mountains were covered in snow and the scenery was breathtaking. Zayn stood in front of the luxury hotel where the meeting was scheduled. He looked at Amir. "If I don't come out within 2 hours, call Layla and release the recorded video." Amir nodded seriously. Zayn entered the luxurious meeting room. It was marble and gold. Sterling sat on a regal chair, smiling coldly. He said, "You came, brave, but courage alone is not enough in this world, Zayn." Zayn sat across from him, placing his right hand in his pocket where the recorder was hidden. Sterling made an offer, join their alliance in exchange for a huge sum and an international position. Sterling said, "You could be rich and powerful, just stop attacking the big interests." Zayn looked at him, then said firmly, "I won't sell my conscience, and I won't betray those who believed in me." Zayn left the room with steady steps, but his heart was pounding violently. He met Amir in the lobby. Amir asked, "Did you record everything?" Zayn nodded. "Every word, now it's time to expose them globally." His face was pale, but his voice was resolute. The next day, Zayn published the recording on the Sandstorm bridge platform. The video spread like wildfire. Sterling went from banking tycoon to international fugitive within hours. Layla called him, screaming with joy, "You did it! You completely destroyed their network." Zayn walked into his bedroom, closed the door, and collapsed on the bed, crying from exhaustion and joy. Layla entered quietly and sat beside him, wiping his tears. "You're crying?" he said hoarsely. "Yes, because I never believed I could do this." Layla hugged him silently. A week later, Zayn received an official letter from the United Nations appointing him as an international financial advisor. He looked at the letter, then at Layla. "This is too much. I'm just a guy who likes numbers." Layla laughed. "You're much more than that. You're a leader." Zayn sat with Amal in the backyard of their home. Amal was painting an oil painting of the sky. He asked her sister, "How do you feel now?" She looked at him and smiled. "I feel alive, truly alive, because of you." He hugged her tenderly. "No, because of your own will." At Zayn and Layla's wedding, the venue was simple but beautiful. Layla wore a simple white dress and Zayn looked confused but happy in his blue blazer. Amir stood beside him as best man, tears in his eyes. Amal threw rice at the couple and screamed with joy. During the ring exchange, Zayn's hand trembled so badly that the ring almost fell. Layla gently caught it and completed the ceremony herself. The guests laughed and Zayn sighed with relief. He looked at Layla and whispered, "You always save me." She smiled. "That's what wives do." After the wedding, Zayn and Layla sat by the sea at night. The moon was full and the stars shone. Zayn said, "Layla, do you remember our first meeting? I was afraid to even look at you." She laughed, "And now you can't stop looking at me." He gently kissed her hand. In the morning, Zayn woke early and went to his office. He found a note from Amir saying, "I've started a new financial education platform in 10 countries. I want you to virtually inaugurate it tomorrow." Zayn felt a wave of pride. He was never alone in this fight. During the virtual inauguration, Zayn spoke to thousands of students around the world. He said, "Don't let your fear define your future. Inside you is a power you can't imagine. Just start." His voice was calm and his hands barely trembled. He noticed the difference himself and smiled. After the lecture, Zayn received a message from a student in Pakistan. It read, "I suffered from social anxiety like you, but your words gave me hope, thank you." Zayn read the message repeatedly, then placed it in his drawer beside the other memories. His drawer was now full of hope. Zayn's mother came to the house carrying a plate of traditional sweets. She said with a smile, "I made this for you, my son. I've been thinking about you since morning." Zayn kissed her head. "Mother, you are the reason for my success. Your prayers brought me here." One day, Zayn visited the prison where Munir Al-Bashar was held. They sat in the visiting room behind glass. Munir looked older and calmer. He said, "Your letter changed me. I've started reading about mathematics in prison." Zayn smiled. "It's never too late to learn." Zayn walked out of the prison feeling a strange emotion. He said to Layla, who was waiting for him, "He's not a monster. He's a human who made mistakes but is trying to change." Layla looked at him. "And that's what makes you different. You believe everyone deserves a second chance." Zayn was offered the position of Minister of Finance, but he quietly refused. He said at a press conference, "I prefer to be free to serve people from outside the system. The position isn't my goal. Change is my goal." The journalists applauded and the newspapers wrote about him with great respect. That evening, Zayn celebrated with his team for refusing the position. Amir said, "You're crazy, Minister of Finance." Zayn laughed, "Maybe, but I'll be a happy crazy person." They raised their juice glasses in a toast. The atmosphere was full of joy and challenge. Zayn decided to write a book about his experience. He wrote in the evenings after Layla slept. He wrote about his fear, his mistakes, his moments of weakness, and how he overcame them. He titled it Storm from Within. On every page, he wrote with painful honesty. When the book was published, it became a bestseller in the country. Zayn stood at a book fair signing copies for readers. His hands trembled, but he smiled at everyone who approached. A small boy told him, "I want to become like you." Zayn patted his head. "You'll become better than me." One night while reading reviews of his book, Zayn found a review written by Munir from prison. It said, "This book is not just a memoir, it's a constitution of hope. I recommend everyone to read it." Zayn was shocked and moved. He cried silently. Zayn visited the hospital where Amal had been treated. He met sick children and spoke to them. He told one of them, "Healing starts from within, never give up." He gave them signed books. The children's smiles were enough to make his entire day. On his balcony, Zayn stood with Layla watching the sunset. He asked her, "Do you think we changed the world?" Layla laughed. "We changed part of it, the rest will come." He held her hand. Together, she looked at him, together. The next morning, Zayn woke up with a new idea. He called Amir. "I have a new project, an app to teach children financial mathematics through a game. We need to make learning fun." Amir said enthusiastically, "I'm with you. This is the idea of your life." The team began working on the app. Zayn sketched ideas on paper while Amir coded and Layla planned marketing. The office was full of energy and colliding ideas. Zayn felt like he was in his true home among these people. In the first test of the app, Amal's school children used it. A teacher sent a message to Zayn. "The kids love it, they're learning math while playing." Zayn felt overwhelming happiness. This was his dream, to make knowledge accessible to everyone. At the app launch event, Zayn stood on stage, his hands almost steady. He said, "This app is free for everyone because education is not a commodity, it's a right." The audience applauded warmly. There were thousands of followers watching the live stream. Zayn felt comfortable on stage for the first time. An international newspaper wrote an article about Zayn titled, "The Humble Genius Who Shook the Global Financial System." Zayn read the article with Layla and felt embarrassed by the titles. Layla said, "You deserve every word." He shook his head. "I just tried to be honest." Over the weekend, Zayn drove to his parents' house. He sat with his father in the garden. Samir said, "Son, you've achieved more than I ever dreamed, but I still see that scared child in your eyes sometimes." Zayn smiled. "He'll never fully disappear, Dad, but I've learned to live with him." Amal walked into the room holding her phone. "Brother, there's a new viral challenge spreading on social media, imitating our platform and scamming people." Zayn stood up immediately, his expression shifting from calm to focused. "Amir, activate the backup server." Layla, start an immediate awareness campaign. "We won't let anyone exploit people's trust." The team worked like a beehive. Zayn coordinated with cybersecurity experts, Amir analyzed the malicious code, and Layla wrote press releases. Within hours, the fake challenge was exposed and the scam websites were shut down. Zayn sighed with relief. After the crisis, Zayn sat with his team. He said, "This proves we need a permanent ethical firewall. It's not enough to build something, we have to protect it." Everyone nodded. "We'll always be on alert," said Amir. It was a new moment of maturity for the team. Zayn received a message from a young man in Gaza. He wrote, "You are an inspiration to us. We are learning mathematics to build our future despite the blockade." Zayn cried as he read it. He replied, "You are stronger than any circumstance. Keep going. The world needs your minds." At night, Zayn stood on his rooftop looking at the stars. He felt grateful for every moment of fear he had experienced because it made him who he was. He whispered to the sky, "Thank you for giving me the courage to be myself." He felt Layla's hand touch his. He said nothing. They just smiled together under the star-filled sky. Zayn woke up early in the morning and found Layla sleeping beside him, sunlight streaming through the window. He looked at her peaceful face and felt a wave of gratitude. He whispered to himself, "It all starts with a dream, but it takes people who believe in you to complete it." He got up quietly so as not to wake her. Zayn went to the kitchen to make coffee and was surprised to find Amir sitting at the kitchen table waiting for him. Amir said with a smile, "I didn't sleep last night. I developed a new algorithm to protect the platform from any future attack. I wanted you to be the first to see it." Zayn looked at the screen, his eyes widening with admiration. Zayn and Amir sat in front of the computer testing the new algorithm. It worked with amazing speed, detecting threats before they happened. Zayn said, "This is genius, Amir." Amir shook his head. "This is genius inspired by you. You taught me that fear can be transformed into power." Layla entered the kitchen, her hair down, wearing a robe, smiling. She said, "Working at 7 in the morning, you're both crazy." Zayn laughed, "Yes, but we're successful crazies." He handed her a cup of coffee and kissed her forehead. He felt overwhelming happiness. Naomi called Zayn and told him that his financial model had been adopted by 3 more African countries. Zayn said excitedly, "That's great, we'll expand the network." His eyes sparkled with hope. He felt that what he started had become a global movement. At the office, Zayn gathered the new analysis team and told them the news. He said, "We're not just a company, we're a movement for change. Each of you is part of that change." The young people applauded enthusiastically and began planning expansion into new markets. At lunchtime, Zayn sat with Layla and Amir in a small restaurant near the office. The atmosphere was relaxed and they talked about future plans. Amir said, "I want to open a branch of the company in Dubai." Layla laughed, "And you, Zayn, what do you want?" Zayn looked at Layla with love. "I just want to be with you." After lunch, Zayn returned to the office and found a letter from his father Samir. It read, "My son, I've paid off all my debts thanks to the reward you gave me. Now I'm a free man, thank you." Zayn read the letter multiple times, feeling indescribable pride. That evening, Zayn went to his parents' house for dinner. They sat around the table, his mother serving food, his father smiling, and Amal telling funny jokes. Zayn felt he was living a perfect moment. He held his mother's hand and kissed it. "I love you, Mom." After dinner, Zayn sat with his father in the garden. Samir said, "My son, you're an important man now, but never forget that you're a human being before anything else." Zayn looked at the sky. "I won't forget, Dad, that's what brought me here." At night, Zayn returned home and found Layla waiting for him on the sofa, asleep with his book in her hands. He smiled, gently took the book from her and covered her with a blanket. He sat beside her, watching her peaceful breathing and felt peace. Zayn woke the next day to a call from Amir. Amir said excitedly, "A major investor from Japan has reached out. He wants to invest in our platform. This is huge." Zayn jumped out of bed. "Really? This is a game changer." Zayn met with the Japanese investor via video. He was an elderly man wearing an elegant suit with a polite smile. He spoke in Japanese, then his translator said, "We are impressed by your transparency model. We want to be partners." Zayn felt nervous but replied with confidence, "We welcome partners who share our values." After the meeting, the team celebrated at the office. Amir brought a Japanese cake and said, "This is a historic occasion, our first Asian investor." Everyone laughed and they raised cups of tea instead of juice in honor of the Japanese guest. Layla called Zayn and told him there would be an international press conference in Tokyo next month and he was invited. Zayn froze for a moment then said, "Tokyo, that's so far." Layla laughed, "I'll be with you, don't be afraid." Zayn began learning some simple Japanese phrases to prepare for his trip. He sat in the office, repeating words with difficulty. Amir teased him gently, "You're saying hello like you're singing a sad song." Zayn laughed and threw the phrasebook at Amir. On the day of travel, Zayn stood at the airport with Layla. He was calmer than the previous time. He looked at Layla. "I'm less afraid this time," she squeezed his hand, "because you've become a professional traveler." They laughed and boarded the plane. Zayn and Layla arrived in Tokyo. The city was amazing, neon lights, skyscrapers, and precise order. Zayn stood in the street looking around in awe. "This is another world." Layla said, "Yes, but the values are the same everywhere." At the conference, Zayn stepped onto the stage in front of an audience of finance experts from across Asia. He wore an elegant blue blazer and neatly styled hair. He spoke about financial transparency and the importance of protecting small investors. His voice was confident and his hands barely trembled. After the conference, many investors and delegates approached him, asking for autographs and photos. Zayn was smiling but very tired. He looked at Layla, who was encouraging him from afar. He whispered across the room, "I'm okay." In the evening, Zayn and Layla strolled through the brightly lit streets of Tokyo. They stopped at a small restaurant to eat sushi. Zayn tried using chopsticks for the first time and failed miserably, sending a piece of sushi flying across the table. Layla laughed out loud. "You're a genius at money, but a failure at eating." Zayn sat with an elderly Japanese man in the Imperial Garden. The man spoke fluent English. He said, "Young people like you are the future of the world. Keep going." Zayn felt humbled. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." The man nodded, "That's enough." Zayn and Layla returned to the hotel, tired but happy. Zayn looked out the window at the city lights. "Layla, can you imagine that a young man afraid of people now stands here speaking to the world?" She hugged him from behind. "I always imagined it, because I saw in you what you didn't see in yourself." The next day, a meeting was held with the Japanese investor to sign the agreement. Zayn stood at the table and signed the document with a luxurious pen. He looked at the investor and smiled. "This is the beginning of a beautiful partnership." They shook hands warmly. After the signing, the investor hosted a lavish dinner. Zayn sat among dignitaries discussing economics and technology. At one moment, he looked at Layla across the table and smiled. He felt he was in the right place with the right person. On the flight back home, Zayn sat by the window looking at the clouds. He typed in his phone, "Today I am not afraid, I am excited." Layla closed her phone and looked at him. "What are you writing?" he said. "The diary of a man who is no longer afraid." Upon arrival, the team welcomed them at the airport. Amir held a sign that read, "Welcome back, money legend." Zayn laughed and hugged Amir. "You're exaggerating." Amir said, "No, you're exaggeratedly awesome." At the office, everyone was waiting to present new expansion reports. Zayn said, "It's time to grow even more. We want a platform on every continent." Everyone was excited and began setting plans. Zayn received a call from the Prime Minister congratulating him on his success in Asia. The Prime Minister said, "You are our pride, Zayn. How can we help you?" Zayn replied humbly, "Just keep supporting transparency. That's all I ask." That evening, Zayn sat with Layla on their balcony. The weather was pleasant and the breeze was cool. He asked her, "Do you think we really changed the world?" She looked at him. "We changed part of it, but more importantly, we changed ourselves." He held her hand, together forever. The next week, Zayn launched an online training program for youth in remote areas. He sat in front of the camera, explaining the basics of ethical investing. His voice was clear, his hands steady. He noticed he wasn't trembling anymore. After the lecture, he received dozens of messages from students around the world, thanking him and asking questions. He read every message with care and replied patiently. Layla said to him, "You're now a teacher to the world." He shook his head. "I'm still a student, I learn every day." Zayn visited a school in a remote village with Amal. He stood in the schoolyard in front of the children and said, "Mathematics is not just numbers, it's the key to freedom." The children clapped enthusiastically, and Amal smiled with tears in her eyes. On the way back, Zayn talked with Amal about her dreams. She said, "I want to become a doctor to treat sick children like me." He looked at her with pride. "You'll be the best doctor in the world." Amal laughed. "And you'll be the best brother in the world." At night, Zayn wrote in his journal, "Fear is not my enemy, fear is my guide. Whenever I feel it, I know I'm about to do something important." He closed the notebook and slept deeply for the first time in years. Zayn woke up to see Layla wearing a new dress spinning in front of him. "What do you think?" He looked at her in awe. "You're always beautiful, but this dress makes you look like a queen." She kissed his cheek. "You're my king."